So a lot of times, because I have been in ministry and in psychology for so long, I get asked oftentimes to talk about, what the church needs to know about mental wellness. And so we'll try to do just a super overview of some stuff and then make some application. Number one is must be a distinction in the church between true mental illness and maladaptive behavior. Okay? True mental illness. So let's suppose, hey, we're going to go spend a Sunday afternoon with Project Unify, and Cody's handing out boxes of food, and we're going to go deliver them to people's houses. You're going to house number 101 on this street, and the person that answers the door is mentally ill. What just went through your mind? Oh boy. What else went through your mind?
What do I do?
What do I do? I don't have an answer for that. What else? Are you scared? Are they dangerous? Are they unpredictable? What's wrong with them? Right? Okay, so we're going to hand out boxes for Project Unify. You're going to house 101, and the dude that answers the door is a cancer survivor. What just went through your mind? He's brave, he's a hero, compassion. In reality, what's the difference between a guy with cancer and a guy who's mentally ill? If it's true mental illness, it's an organic condition. My liver, my heart, my spleen, my brain is an organ. And people who are truly mentally ill have an organic condition. They did not cause it, and it cannot be cured. They don't have weak faith. They don't have bad character. It's not that they don't pray enough. Looking at somebody going, have you tried not being depressed? Is asking me, hey, Lonnie, have you tried not being short? Okay. Paul tells Timothy, God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and either self-control or a sound mind. Is that ubiquitously, universally true? No. Are there people on the planet who don't have sound minds?
Yes.
Most of the things that we talk about in Scripture, worry, anxiety, happiness, joy, interpersonal, assumes that we're talking about people who are under the bell curve of normalcy. God will not hold you accountable for that which you are not responsible. A 95-year-old dude with Alzheimer's who's cussing like a sailor and walks out of Walmart because he thinks he paid for stuff, but he's actually shoplifting, ain't going to hell for shoplifting and cussing. Because he's 95 years old and he has Alzheimer's. A 32-year-old kid with a functional IQ of 75 who has mental retardation is not going to be held accountable for what he does. Even if that behavior is terrible, he's innocent evil. There are people who do not have power, sound mind, and self-control. And we don't have to worry about their salvation. Now, the church has to know how to deal with them. The church has to know how to interact with them. The church has to know what to do for them. But there's a difference between true mental illness, somebody who can't, and then maladaptive behavior. Now, what we mean by maladaptive behavior is people who, for whatever reason, as they grew up, family of origin, traditions that they grew up with, they have this idea of, I call them implicit beliefs. This is how the world works. Now, nobody walks around in my mind. Nobody walks around in yours. So the things that you think are the rules of engagement, you've never really thought about. Nobody else thinks that way. Those of you in the room who can do math think everybody else can do math. Stop it. We can't. Okay? People who can draw think everybody else can draw. I remember, friends would come to my house, we'd play outside, climb trees, get on the jungle gym, it would rain, have to go inside. What do you want to do? Let's draw. We don't draw. What do you mean you don't draw? We don't draw. Well, I went through a scribble pad a week from Sky City as a little boy. And now I've got to spend all afternoon with this guy entertaining him. He doesn't draw. Communist. They know what to do. But if nobody challenges the way you see the world, you assume everybody else sees the world the way you see the world. Teenagers are egocentric. Now, that's not wrong. It's something you'll grow out of. If you don't grow out of it, you've got a personality disorder, by the way. But teenagers are egocentric. That means everything's about them. They can't walk by a window without looking at their reflection. They can't pick up one of these things without taking their own picture. If everything is about you, then everything is also your fault. My mom and dad divorced because they were fussing about my grades. That guy molested me because there's something wrong with me. My dad abandoned me, there must be something wrong with me. Because if you're egocentric, if everything is about you, then everything is also your fault. Well, if you live that way, the longer you live that way, the further away from normal, healthy behavior you get. Does that make sense? You guys familiar with a vector? Okay, I'm not a long distance shooter. Longest shot I've ever made, 725 yards. That's intermediate shooting for the guys who shoot well. But let's say that I put my rifle right here and I've got it all braced up and I'm looking at a target downrange and I turn the knob on my scope. You turn this knob, your bullet goes up and down. You turn this knob, your bullet goes left and right, okay? If I click it, one MOA at 100 yards, that bullet will move over at 100 yards, 1 inch. Everybody got that? So if I drew a straight line and I had another straight line at 100 yards, it would deviate 1 inch. How far would that same straight line deviate at 200 yards? 300 yards? 400? 1,800 yards? Okay, the further out you go on that straight line, the bigger that gap gets between your target. Everybody got that? So I've got this belief that I'm bad because I was molested. I've got this belief that something's wrong with me because my parents divorced. I've got this belief that something's wrong with me because I was born out of wedlock. And I believed that for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years. You see how far away my behavior gets from what's true and right and normal? That's not mental illness. That's a maladaptive behavior. That's, hey, I've got some rules that work for me, some beliefs that I use to survive, and sometimes they don't survive. Sometimes they're not good. I've never, okay, and that's with a big N, never lived in a house that didn't have a rope swing. I'm a rope climber. I'm a rock climber. Even when you climb rocks and you do it right, that's called free climbing. That doesn't mean you don't have safety gear. It means I'm climbing the rock and I'm only using the rope to catch me if I fall. But if you fall while rock climbing, you know what you're supposed to do? Grab the rope. It orients you to face the cliff, so you fall down and you land like Spider-Man and you don't swing into the back of the cliff. So I've got this belief, if you're swinging on a rope swing, if you're swinging on a tire swing, if you're rock climbing, if you're rappelling, you know what keeps you alive? Don't let go of the rope. And it works marvelous. I'm still here. Imagine what happened to me when they put me in the Tennessee River behind a boat and gave me a rope and said, we're going to drag you across the surface of the water on 2 pieces of wood. Have fun. So I'm out in the middle of the river riding on, and I lose my balance and I fall. You know what my rules are? Don't let go of the rope. What happens if you're water skiing and you don't let go of the rope? Yes. The very thing that has kept me alive all my life is now dragging me under and drowning me. That's maladaptive behavior. Now, sometimes we don't realize how bad it's drowning us because it is a survival skill. Well, does it work? Yeah, I'm still here. Even though it's not ideal, it works on some level. I wouldn't repeat it. Okay, people who repeat things that don't work and don't have insight that it doesn't work, that's maladaptive behavior, not mental illness. That makes sense? So the rules that I bring to the table now, if I could tell you the difference between maladaptive behavior and true mental illness on every occasion, then we'd all get on my helicopter and fly someplace to eat seafood, because I'd be a rich dude. General terms, I use an idea called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, basically, do I have insight to my own emotions? Do I understand what my feelings are and how to respond to them? You'll be surprised that there are people who can't respond and can't label their feelings. Girls with eating disorders, everything that they feel that's bad is hunger. Or hunger becomes a way to create endorphins to mask a feeling or to create a feeling. Every emotion that you can experience, you got from God. Your emotions are God-given and they're all valid. Anger management is not getting angry. If you don't get angry, you've never driven on the parkway. Okay? Being brave is not, I've not ever been scared. If you've never been scared, you're not very smart. Life's a contact sport. You haven't done very much if you've never been scared. Bravery is not I'm not scared. Bravery is when I'm scared, does it control me or do I control my response to it? Anger management is not I'm not angry. It's when I feel anger, does it control me or do I control my response to it? People with emotional insight understand that their emotions are information, not instruction. Now, most people who are having difficulty getting along with other people don't understand it. They live their emotion. Now, we're all guilty of it and there's nothing wrong with it. You know, hey, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm scared, I'm depressed. We do that, that's a convention of our speech. But that's not really true. I'm Lonnie, I feel sad. I'm Lonnie, I feel angry. I'm Lonnie, I feel anxious. I'm Lonnie, I feel depressed. But when we let our emotions become our identity, then our emotions, instead of just telling us something, we think our emotions tell us to do something. Does that make sense? And this is a little uncomfortable and it may be even borderline inappropriate for those of you with deeper sensitivities. I apologize. I'm 61 years old. I can't drive from here to Huntsville. I actually live in Gurley and not stop and go to the men's room. There, I said it. Okay? You know, at my age, you never skip a nap, never pass a men's room. That's just all there is to it. All right? So when I get in the car to go home, I'm going to call my lovely wife. And I'll say, hey, I'm headed home. Somewhere after I cross the Tennessee River Bridge, I'm going to start looking for a Conoco station. And I'll call my wife and say, sweetheart, I'm stopping the car. I got to go to the men's room. 45 minutes later, I get back in the car and say, hey, baby, I'm back in the car. She said, what took you so long? Well, I walked into this gas station. There's a big sign that said clean restrooms. And I had to find a mop and a bucket, some rubber gloves. They didn't have any hot water, and the guy wouldn't loan me a brush. And she'll say, look, the sign didn't tell you to clean the restrooms. They tell you the restrooms are clean. There are people who live in this world, and when they experience their emotions, it's telling them how to live, not just telling them something. Okay? Your emotions are information, they're not instruction. Now, if I learn, hey, I've got insight, this is a feeling I'm feeling, what does that tell me? Not what does it tell me to do, what is it? Now, once I learn what it tells me, then I can do what's known as emotional regulation. Emotional regulation means that I can delay gratification. I don't get to just get what I want. I can control my impulses. I don't get to do what I feel. And I can put in hard work to get a long-term result at the end of a project. That's emotional regulation. Now, once I learn to regulate my emotions, then I can self-soothe. I can deal with feelings of anxiety. I can deal with feelings of irritability, and I can deal with the consequences of failure. People who don't do this live in a constant state of distress. And you look at our young people today, and what are they? In a constant state of, why? Because they've been told other people control your emotions. He said something mean to me, I have to feel bad. He didn't do something I want him to do, I have to feel, no. If I can make you, don't become responsible for things you don't control. Don't let other people control things that don't belong to you. If I can make you mad, I can make you happy. If I can make you drink, I can make you sober. If I can make you cheat, I can make you faithful. If I can make you quit the church, I can make you sit on the front row every Sunday. If I can make you kill yourself, I keep you alive. When you think that other people's words only have the power you give them, and that's it. You can say anything you want to say about me. I ask myself 3 questions. Is it true? Can I change it? Does it need to be changed? And that's it. You say something about me and it's disparaging, it's unkind, it's unfair. Question number one, is it true? No. Done. All right, it's true. Can I change it? Lonnie, you're short and bald. Well, that's absolutely true. Can't do anything about it. Drive on. Lonnie, not only are you short and bald, but you're a little fluffy around the edges. Okay. Is it true? Yes. Can I change it? My doctor seems to think so. At my height, my body mass index say I should weigh 149 pounds. The last time I saw 149 pounds, I was on a bus going to Memphis. You know, it's unbelievable. My wife has to do this health screening at her school. I walk in. How old are you? How tall are you? 5'4". How much you weigh? 180 pounds. They look at you with those judging eyes. You have to go sit in that line every year, to get on the insurance. Last time Jackie was at school before she retired, I go into this thing, I'm standing in line, I'm already in a bad mood. Name, age, gender. Male, female, other. I looked at the nurse, I said, are we really doing this here? She goes, oh yeah, you whatever you want to put down. How tall are you? 5'10". She looked at me. She said, don't judge me. I feel 5'10" today. That body mass index went right out the window, folks. It was great. I'm a taller dude for having done it. Is it true? Can I change it? Yeah, I could change my weight. Does it need to be changed? Well, some of the things I do as a personal hobby, my walking around weight between 175 and 180 is about like I like. Okay, I had a kid in my jiu-jitsu class Tuesday who was 6'2" and weighed 298 pounds. If I weighed less than 180, it's like a grizzly bear playing with a tennis ball. Now I put him to sleep with a punch choke, but we won't talk about that in public. Anyway, I don't need to change. So when other people's words only have the power you give them. But if I'm a victim of what you think or what you say or what you do or what you don't do, then I've given up the ability of self-control. So number one, do I have insight to my emotions? Once I understand my emotions, can I delay gratification? Can I control my impulses? And then can I motivate myself to do hard things for a long-term result? I believe in a theory, and I don't think I invented the phrase, but I used it so much I think it's mine now, called intentional adversity. I do things that you will not, so I can do things you cannot. And that's it. The only way to run faster is to run faster. But that hurts. It makes you throw up. It makes your legs burn. But if you want to run faster, you got to run. So once I get that, now that I understand my emotions and I recognize that my emotions don't drive the bus, but I control my response to them, I can walk into a room and recognize emotions in you. He's sad, he's irritated, he's scared, he's lonely. And to the degree that I can recognize emotions in other people and respond to them, then I can handle relationships. And then I can start living the world of, hey, this is how I would like to be treated if I was in that position. And it gives me the ability for leadership, for popularity, for influence, and for all the things that make dealing with other people successful. And that's emotional intelligence. People who can't do those things are mentally ill. People who won't do those things are immature, maladaptive, or need some growing up to do. And so when I walk into a room and I start dealing with somebody who's in crisis in their marriage, in crisis with their adult children, whatever the deal is, I start gauging, do I think the person has a deficit in emotional intelligence, or do they lack the capacity for emotional intelligence? Capacity means you can't do it, not accountable for it. Deficit means I can, I just don't use it. Problem, lack of resources. Dysfunction, misuse of resources. Does that make sense? Sort of, kind of. Now, when you start talking about mental illnesses, and there's a book called the DSM-5. When I was in grad school, it was the DSM 3.5. So they keep changing the rules. They make stuff up, all right? Basically, rather than going to a deep dive, if you want to understand kind of just a workman's area. I put mental illness in 4 buckets: mood disorders, personality disorders, psychotic disorders, neurodevelopmental. I don't treat addiction as a disorder. Addiction is a coping skill based on trauma. It's something that worked for you and got linked to these sets of feelings, and it's not what you use, it's what do you feel when you make the decision to use. That's what created the addiction. So I don't count it as a mental disorder, okay? Mood disorders are people who have trouble getting along with their own emotions. That's depression, that's bipolar, that's anxiety, and again, capacity versus deficit. But mood disorders are people, if a person says, Lonnie, I got fired from my job, on my way home I ran over my dog, and when I walked in the house I realized my wife had packed her bags and she's leaving, I think I'm depressed. No, you're normal, because you have circumstances that you're interpreting as, hey, this is not what I expected. When life doesn't turn out like I expected to you, that's loss. Human grieve all losses. Grief and loss is a precursor to depression. That's a normal response. Lonnie, I make $800,000 a year. I have a 2,200 square foot boat. I have an 8,000 square foot house, and I'm married to a model. But my brain gives me a signal that says my life is terrible. I never get out of the basement. That's depression. Depression with circumstances is what we call cognitive depression. A bad feeling that doesn't have any antecedent circumstances is what we call clinical depression. Does that make sense? So mood disorders, people have trouble getting along with their own emotions. Personality disorders are people who have trouble getting along with other persons, or people who have trouble having relationships with relationships. People with personality disorders, and there's 12 different personality disorders. There's the erratic, there's the paranoid. Read Joe Navarro's book, Dangerous Personalities. He's an FBI profiler. He basically says you have predators, you have narcissists, you have the emotionally unstable, and then you have the needy or the paranoid. Those are the only 4 personalities. He puts them in 4 big buckets. And read his book, Dangerous Personality. But people with personality disorders, they have a history of not being able to get along with other people. You'll notice that they've had multiple jobs, multiple relationships. They have attended 15 congregations. You could look at their life from a view of 5,000 feet. It looks like an F5 tornado went through it. Hey, who's your best friend? Susie. How long has she been your best friend? 3 weeks. That's not how best friends work. Who's your best friend 3 weeks ago? Martha. How long are your best friend? 4 days. How many best friends have you had? 37. No. When somebody says, I worked at Walmart, I worked at Target, I worked at Burger King, I worked for the church, I was a janitor, I was a rocket scientist, and everybody I ever worked for is an idiot. That person got a personality disorder. And they don't realize the problem with we is me, okay? Then you have psychotic disorders. Psychotic disorders are people who have trouble having relationships with reality. They see things you don't see, they hear things you don't hear, they taste things, they smell things, they feel things, they believe things that just aren't true. And they don't have an interface with reality. If this is reality and this is your perceived reality, to the degree that they overlap, you have mental wellness. To the degree that those things are disintegrated, you have a severe case of psychoticism or whatever. My very first day as an intern, getting my license as a therapist, I worked at Marshall Jackson County Mental Health Center. Was observing an 82-year-old psychiatrist interview a guy. He comes in, sits down with his arms crossed, like he's in a straitjacket. I thought it was odd, but I'm an intern, what do I know? I'm taking notes, he's talking and for the first 10 minutes, it was just a super normal conversation. And then he tells this psychiatrist, I'm a 400-year-old FBI agent. Well, I've got a master's degree and the ink's not dry on it yet. I can solve this. I interrupt the session. I said, excuse me, sir, the country's only been here for 200 years. You can't be a 400-year-old FBI agent. To which he replied, I said I was 400 years old and an FBI agent. Try to pay better attention. He turns back to the psychiatrist. I'm the crazy guy in the room. Now, a caveat to that has nothing to do with this lesson is 25 minutes into this interview, something happened. He leaps out of his chair, straddles Dr. Trainer, and starts raining the thunder on him, on this 82-year-old psychiatrist. I put him in an arm lock, stuck him in the corner, held him there with a little gentle pressure on his wrist. First day as an intern, and I put hands on a client. I'm probably going home, probably not going to get my master's degree. My future does not look well. End of the day, I get called into the big guy's office, stand there on the carpet, you know. So, Mr. Jones, I understand you bring a skill set to our facility. Whoa, wait a minute. This is just No. We have work for you this summer. Don't feel compelled to wear a tie and wear sensible shoes. For 18 weeks, I was the bouncer at the mental health center. Every oppositional defiant, every intermittent explosive disorder, and every combative person got to be in the room with me. I earned my master's degree doing the heavy lifting at the mental health center. It was a great summer. Anyway, but then you have mood disorders, personality disorders, psychotic disorders, and then you have neurodevelopmental disorders. Neurodevelopmental disorders are either the greater than or the less than symbol. It's brains that didn't grow up or brains that have been around too long. Okay, so you've got a brain that did not reach the milestones. Somewhere before the age of 12, you started noticing this child doesn't have bilateral control. You started noticing this child can't read faces. You started noticing this child can't read or write. The term that we're not allowed to use anymore is the term retarded. Well, that refers to mental retardation. If I start to walk out of this room and Caleb grabs me by the belt, he has retarded my progress. A child whose IQ doesn't go above 70, his development mentally, it has been retarded, restricted, it's been stopped. He got a 28-year-old body and functional intelligence of a third grader. That's people who neurodevelopmental haven't grown up. And then you have people who, for toxins or for degradation or dementia or Alzheimer's or traumatic brain injury, their brain has been around and now it's ceasing to function. It doesn't do as well as it used to. And so there's your four categories. When I deal with people in crisis, I'm looking at, hey, is this a mood disorder? Is this a personality disorder? Is this a psychotic disorder? Or is this a neurodevelopmental disorder? And then sometimes you get these symptoms from people who've experienced trauma. And trauma's a deal breaker completely. And what's traumatic to me is not traumatic to you. And what's traumatic to you is not traumatic to me. And when we get traumatized, we create a set of rules that help us survive. Because when something traumatic happens to me, it says something about me, it says something about you, it says something about my past, it says something about my future, and it says something about God. And to the degree that those meanings are valid, I have healthy responses. To the degree those meanings aren't valid, I don't have very healthy responses. Does that make sense? So Joseph's brothers take their dad a coat dipped in blood. And he says, this means my son is dead. He's been torn by a wild animal. I'll never be happy again. Right? Is that what that meant? No, Joseph's alive running Egypt. You know, he's not dead. He wasn't torn by, and I don't know how you get a kid out of a coat without tearing his coat, unless you're like a ninja lion. You know, but you've got these ideas, and he lived his entire life until he's reunited with Joseph, letting these three ideas control him. Because look how he behaves as Benjamin. So that's what we mean by maladaptive thinking and coping mechanisms. So you've got the mood disorders, the personality disorders, the psychotic disorders, and then you have the neurodevelopmental disorders, and then you have a kind of a special thing where trauma creates some of those responses for folks. So what does the Bible say about all this? Well, look at Romans chapter 12. Really interesting that you've got this Jew-Gentile conflict, and Paul writes people he's never actually met a letter and says it doesn't do you any good to be a Jew, it doesn't do you any good to be a Gentile, it doesn't matter who you are. When people responded to God, if you outline Romans chapter 1 like Jimmy Allen did, you hated God. H, you did not honor Him. A, you did not acknowledge Him. T, you did not thank Him. And E, you exchanged His image for the image of other things. So these people hated God. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Gentile. The Jews had the law, didn't obey it. The Gentiles could look at the world and see by the things that are visible, the invisible characteristics of God. Young people, you start dealing with atheism and that kind of stuff, you ask your friends to pick a worldview. Because you only have two. Matter has always existed, or intelligence has always existed. You can only be in one of those two camps. Okay? Now, if matter has always, and Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins did the mathematical calculations and came to the conclusion mathematically that the universe is not eternal. It had a starting point. It had a singularity. So they will admit, even the most staunch atheists will tell you, the material world is not eternal. So matter has not always existed. But there are people who believe that. But if you're in the camp, matter has always existed, then the minds in this room came from rocks. Or intelligence has always existed, an eternal God, then the minds in this room came from that mind. The rocks outside came from that mind. The sky above us came from that mind. The universe in its entirety came from that. You can only live in one of two camps. Matter has always existed, or intelligence has always existed. And you just pick the one you want, and then you've got to be consistent with what you believe. So Paul says, hey, you knew there was a God, and even though by nature you knew there was a God, you ignored it, and you started creating images to make God in your image or to make God in the image of things, rather you're trying to be in God's image. So he says, it doesn't do any good to be a Jew, doesn't do anything to be a Gentile. You've all got a sin problem, and the only way to solve your sin problem is through the blood of Christ, through the grace of God and through your faith. And then after he does that, he begins to talk to them about some practical ideas about how to live as Christians. And when he gets to Romans 12, he does this masterful discussion that looks like an interpersonal relationship kind of thing, but if you look at it based on how we introduce the lesson, you'll find some really cool similarities. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. Okay, when Paul asks us to live a certain way, he's not going to ask us to do what we do because of what God can do to us. He's going to ask us to live the way we live because what God has done for us. I beg you, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Now what he means by that is a sacrifice was something that you brought to worship God and you burned it up. Paul's asked us to be a sacrifice that is burned out. Not a flash in the pan, but my entire existence is serving in the service of God. So based on God's mercies, I want you to be a living sacrifice. Now, what does a sacrifice do? Do not be conformed to this world. Don't live in their image. Don't live in their icon, but be transformed. Now, how does renewal and transformation take place? Well, by the renewal of your mind. Paul says you change the way you think, therefore you change the way you live. That's called cognitive behavioral therapy in my world. Paul said, look, when you change the way you think about yourself, you change the way you think about others, you change the way you live. When you change the way you think about God, God is sovereign, Jesus is Lord. If you ascend to that, you have to change the way you live. So Paul says your ability to calculate things mentally, to cognitively change the way you see things is going to affect the way you live. And you choose. I can define myself as a spiritual creature. I can define myself as a physical creature. And depending on how I see myself, it changes how I interact and how I deal with other people. For by the grace given to me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance to the faith God has distributed to each of you. You notice that sense of self we talked about in emotional intelligence? Inherent to the Christian ethic is how well I do self-regulation. Love your neighbor as your... Thank you, sir. If you don't know how to treat you, you don't know how to treat anybody else. And if you think too highly of yourself, you're a narcissist and you treat everybody else like dirt. If you think too lowly of yourself, you're codependent and let everybody else treat you like dirt. In order to be able to treat you appropriately, I have to have a proper view of me. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment and according to the faith God has distributed each person. For just as each one of us has one body with many members, these members do not all have the same function. So in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all others. We have different gifts. according to the grace given to us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is encouraging, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do so diligently. And if it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Just as an aside, how many of those things in this list of leadership are up front out loud wearing a tie with a title? And how much of these things that Paul talks about leadership in the body is similar to what Peter talked about with faith and virtue and love and self-control? But what he says in this section is a person who is spiritually mature and also mentally healthy knows how to operate in a system. See, in order for me to use emotional intelligence and survive, and for me to be a spiritually mature person, I have to have intrapersonal skills, know how to deal with me, interpersonal skills, know how to deal with you, systemic skills, know how to deal with all y'all, and then judgmental skills, making good decisions based on right and wrong. So when Paul talks about a person who is spiritually mature, it really looks mentally healthy because he has a good view of self. He doesn't think too highly of himself. He doesn't think too low of himself. He changes the way he sees himself, changes the way he sees others, and then he can operate in a system. And you notice the people who are highly dysfunctional don't do well in school and home and family and in church, right? Spiritually mature, mentally healthy. Keep going. Love must be sincere. People who are mentally healthy and spiritually mature do not use emotional blackmail. I don't love you because you can do something for me. I don't use my love as something I give or take. I love you unconditionally. And if I don't love you unconditionally, then I really don't love you. Okay? Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It does not require reciprocity, and it is not contingent upon you deserving it. So Paul says, look, people who are spiritually mature don't use their emotions to manipulate or control other people. They love sincerely. Now, people have personality disorders and people who are mentally ill, they often use love and hate and access to other people to try to control other people. And Paul says, don't play those games. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves. So a person who's spiritually mature and mentally healthy can put themselves in a proper relationship with other people. Your needs come before my rights. In a lot of cases, just your likes come before mine, your wants come before mine. Now, when you sacrificially give to other people, like all the guys in the room, you're going to ask your spouse, where do you want to eat? She's going to say what? It doesn't matter. And you're going to tell her where you're going, she's going to say, I don't like that. And you're going to say, well, of the places that don't matter the least, where would you like to go? And she's going to name some frou-frou place that you don't want to eat at. And you're going to go to Chicken Salad Chick or something like that, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. You're smart to do that, okay? You can eat... Now, this is a trap, my friend. There's no winning here. You just eat Chicken Salad Chick and be happy, okay? But when I make those decisions, so first thing is your needs always trump my rights. Your vulnerabilities, if you've got an enduring vulnerability, if there's something that makes you insecure, I've got to be careful about your trauma that you bring with you. But in most cases, if I decide, okay, I'm going to eat Chicken Salad Chick, if I give to you, that will work and we be sustainable. If I'm giving in, giving up, or giving out, that doesn't work very well. Because at some point I start keeping score. And people who keep score always feel like they're losing. When you are sacrificial in what you do for other people, it's not giving in, it's not giving up, it's not giving out, it's just giving. Your needs before my rights, your vulnerabilities have to be considered. And then if you're a weaker brother, I have to worry about those sensitivities as well. People who can't do that are mentally ill. People who won't do that are spiritually immature. Everybody get that? So keep going. Never be lacking in zeal. Keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. He said, listen, your circumstances don't get to control your behavior. You have to have perseverance and hope and prayer and zeal regardless of what's going on. Now, people who let their circumstances control how they respond to people, they don't have emotional intelligence because they don't have self-regulation. They can't do impulse control. They don't do delayed gratification. It's hard, I quit. It's difficult, I'm not going to do it. You offended me, we're not friends anymore. And all of a sudden you start noticing that what we talk about as people who have the capacity for mental health, they're either is the opposite of what we see as spiritually mature, or that behavior is maladaptive, or they're spiritually immature, or they're mentally ill. Everybody get that? So keep going. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Basically, the way you treat me doesn't get to determine how I treat you. People who are not mature spiritually and people who are not mature emotionally or psychologically, then they decide that our relationship is really based on how you act. No, our relationship is based on how God expects me to act. Jesus says, you've heard from those of old, you love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, in order that you may be sons of your Father. My self-identity as a child of God dictates how I treat you, not your behavior. And so you've got this passage in Romans 12 where he says, it doesn't really matter how other people treat you. You have to determine to treat them based on your identity as one of God's children, and your circumstances don't control your behavior, and other people don't control your behavior. Just for the kids, the turn the other cheek passage. My understanding of that is that when somebody slaps you with an open hand, that's an insult. Your life's not in danger. Okay? So turning the other cheek is how you respond to an insult, not how you respond to somebody attacking your wife, your girlfriend, your spouse, or a small child. So understand there's some places where you put some limits on people's behaviors, and I don't think the Bible makes us by default be pacifist. But if I hit you and you hit me back, that's retaliation. That's not self-defense. Okay? In self-defense is you duck or you block it. But once I've hit you and you hit me back, that's just retaliation. So if somebody slaps you on the cheek, they haven't attacked you, they've insulted you. So don't misrepresent that. Verse 17, do not repay evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. Just because you cheated me doesn't mean I get to be dishonest to you. Just because you're rude to me doesn't mean I get to be rude to you. Other people's behavior do not dictate my behavior. I live the way I live, and I have the ethics that I have because I'm connected to Christ. Your ethics don't connect you to Christ. Your connection to Christ dictates your ethics. And so as a spiritually mature, mentally healthy person, I've got a good view of self. It gives me a good view of others. I view myself in comparison to Jesus, not a comparison to you. I function in a system. My circumstances don't control my behavior. Other people don't control my behavior. And even if you're bad, mean, or rude, I don't get to do that. Now, there is a place for some limit setting. What happens when a youth group or an eldership or a congregation or a family has somebody who comes in and they're toxic? What happens if you run into somebody? Paul will say, if you've got a person who's causing division, you mark him. Paul will say, if you've got a person who's living in an open, rebellious sin and making a bad mark on the church, you make them choose. You can be married to her and come to church, or if you come to church, you can't be married to her. So there's limit setting in the New Testament. Romans 12. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, I used to read this verse, it used to scare me to death because it felt like a burden. If possible, as much as it depends on you, you get along with everybody. You guys know who Brian Regan is? He's a goofy comedian. He does this routine. He says, you're sitting in the floor playing with Legos. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, black and white TV, Smokey the Bear appears. Only you can prevent forest fires. Me? I'm 6 years old. That's a lot of pressure. Okay? That's the way I used to feel about this verse. As much as possible, as much as it depends on you, get along with everybody. And I thought I had to, quote unquote, make everybody happy. You know what this verse teaches? As much as possible intimates it may not be possible. As much as it depends on you intimates it might not depend on you. There are some situations where your behavior is toxic, dangerous, anti-Christian, and in order for us to maintain any kind of semblance of a relationship, I've got to put some distance between us. Whoever controls the distance controls the damage. You can't let a connection become an entanglement. Now, when you put limits on toxic people, when you do tough love, or even when you do discipline, please understand why it hasn't worked. Because our idea of tough love was, if I do this, then you'll do that. Well, no, that's manipulation and control. My limits, my boundaries are not designed to change your behavior. You're going to do what you're going to do. My limits control my response to your behavior. But if I do anything with the idea that it's punitive or vindictive or going to control your behavior, then I'm manipulating, I'm controlling you. You can act any way you want to act, but I'm not going to allow it to affect me. Does that make sense? And I think in some cases that we've misinterpreted that as a thing where we've got to capitulate all the time. I think there's some places, 3 times in the New Testament, Paul says, I'm a Roman citizen, you can't treat me this way. And I think that's precedent for me to go, hey, there's some things that you're damaging the entire church. You're damaging this person. You're damaging me. Now make sure you're talking about real toxicity. You know, there's being hurt and there's being injured. There's a big difference, okay? If a person is just hurting, sometimes it's inconvenient. We draw battle lines all the time over things that make us uncomfortable. They're not unscriptural. Unscriptural is where you draw the line, not uncomfortable. Toxic is where you draw the line, not inconvenient or hard or just require a lot of psychic energy. Does that make sense? And even in a marriage, Jesus says, hey, if you got a partner and they've been sexually unfaithful to you, you don't have to maintain that marriage bond. That gives you the right to leave and remarry. The Apostle Paul in Corinthians will say, the wife shouldn't depart from her husband. That's ideal. But if she does depart, there's an exception, remain unmarried or be reconciled. Shouldn't leave. If you leave, don't remarry. But you can remain unmarried or be reconciled. If you remarry, that's unacceptable. So this is ideal, this is unacceptable, this is field expedient. That's allowable in Christianity. And I think sometimes when you deal with toxic people, you can do interpersonal or intrapersonal forgiveness. Now, I probably couldn't defend this in a debate against, Kyle Budd or somebody. When God forgives, God always reconciles. Just as if I'd never sinned. I think there are times when I can forgive you and not reconcile because of your toxicity. For instance, Caleb borrows my truck, the tactical Toyota. He goes out here and wraps it around the telephone pole. Well, I love Caleb. I'm not going to sue him. I'm not going to sue his insurance company. I pay State Farm. State Farm will fix my truck. Caleb comes up to me and says, hey, Lonnie, can I borrow your truck? I toss him my keys. Forgiveness with reconciliation. We've returned to the place we were before he wrecked my truck. Caleb borrows my truck, wrecks my truck, wraps around the pole. I don't sue him. I don't sue his insurance company. Like a good neighbor, State Farmer's there. My insurance fixes my truck. Caleb comes to me and says, hey, Lonnie, can I borrow your truck? Where are you moving? Well, I've got a toolbox I need to move. What time are you going to move it? Thursday at 4. I'll be over there. He's forgiven. He still has access to my truck. He's just not driving it. That's forgiveness without reconciliation. We didn't return to the same point. And I believe you're allowed to do that. As much as possible, as much as it depends on you, live at peace with all people. And it's 3 o'clock, so I need to hush. The last thing in Romans 12, talking about mentally healthy and spiritually mature, is do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Satan is not omnipresent. He's not omnipotent, and he's not omniscient like God. So in order for him to get his work done, he's got to have help. And oftentimes hurt people. And if you can ever put your filter on and see that the behavior of people is because they too have been hurt, if you can ever read into that context, you can tolerate a lot more things when you filter out that this is the way this person has learned to survive. And they're not actually against you, they're actually trying to hurt you. And then you have to decide, is this toxic or is this just inconvenient? But I'm not ever going to overcome evil with evil. I only overcome evil with good. I do a lot of experiential games. I got asked to speak at Vestavia Hills. They asked me to come do the book Grappling with Life. I took a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and we taught the lessons out of the book to 250 freshmen at Vestavia Hills. Well, the last thing we did to close the day is we took the outline of the basketball court and we put 250 kids there. And so we're going to play a game called Zombie Tag. I don't know if you know much about the zombie apocalypse. Somebody gets the zombie virus, they bite somebody, they get the zombie virus, then 2 people bite and they get and then you got zombies everywhere. So the way you play zombie tag is you got a person who's it. And every time he tags somebody, that person becomes it and they tag somebody. And every time they tag somebody, they tag somebody. And so we're going to see how long it takes to get everybody in the room tagged. Ready, go. 45 seconds, 250 kids were tagged. Done. The zombie virus swept through the room. We're going to play it again. This time you have 45 seconds. But in this 45 seconds, if somebody tags you, do nothing. In 45 seconds, you get about 35 people tagged in a crowded gym. And then the last time you play zombie tag, you say, hey, if somebody tags you, stand in front of the person that tagged you and try to keep him from touching the other people. The coolest thing happened at Vestavia Hills. 3 freshman boys figured out the game. And when I said go, they grabbed their hands and they circled the zombie and contained him. They sacrificially separated the toxin from everybody else in the room. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. If you get hurt and you hurt other people, then the hurt people hurt other people who hurt other people who hurt other people, and Satan wins. If you get hurt and you just quit, and I'm just a victim and I can't do anything, then Satan still has freedom to move. But if at some point you decide, I'm going to be the person who stands between them, and you're mentally healthy and spiritually mature, you protect the people you love, and you love the people you protect. Thank you guys for studying with me.